Hey, today's gonna be a great day. It's Vision Builder Sunday. That's our capital stewardship campaign. And if you're here with us for the first time, or maybe for the fourth time, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I came on the wrong Sunday. No, it's a great Sunday to be here because you're gonna get a taste, you're gonna get a preview of what it is we do, why it is we gather together every Sunday, and why it is we have connect groups and discipleship groups, and we believe that God is doing amazing things through this church. You know, we don't do this just for worship, but man, I would do it just for that worship. And we don't do it just to know God better ourselves, although I would do that just to know God better myself. We do this with all that we have. We build these buildings and we create kids' rooms so that people can experience what we've experienced. So people can get to know the God that we serve, because we're so thankful and have a heart full of the presence of God. We live the rest of our lives in response, hoping that God might use us in the simplest of circumstances to touch one life, to touch two lives. And if you're here maybe for the first few times, I just want you to know we pray every week for every person that walks through those doors, especially the ones that we don't know yet. And we pray that today you'll have an experience with him, that your heart might just turn a little bit, that you might consider joining us as we seek him, as we worship him, as we spend our whole lives in relationship with him. Today I want to do something really special. We've got a video. We've spent a lot of times, the people in this church spent hours and hours and hours just to tell you 3 stories, one from each one of our campuses, 3 very different faith journeys, but 3 very significant faith journeys. This isn't the sum total of all that we've done. It's just a few clips of the expectation we have of what God can do in someone's life when we just give him a go, when we give him an opportunity to move. So sit back in your seat, settle in, and take a look at what God's doing in C3 Church.
You know, sometimes we think we have it all figured out, and he likes to come and shake up our snow globe, as I like to say. And that's what he did.
We felt God calling us to move to Atlanta, so we just went ahead and said we were going to do it.
And my dad took me from my mom when I was about 12 to raise me in Vegas to give me a better life. But I fell into drugs and just around the wrong people, overdosed at 16 and was raped, and still hung out with the same people. And my dad just finally gave up on me and says that, you know, I need to go back to my mom. And at that time, my mom introduced me to cocaine.
My husband, Billy, and I have always been a part of the Vision Builders. Anytime at C3 they were having a building campaign, we've always been a part of it. And our motto has always just been to be faithful and consistent and as generous as we could possibly be, and God would take care of the rest.
I took a job in Columbus, Georgia at Martin Army Hospital for a nationally recognized, pretty large electrical contractor. And there was a lot of promise with this company, and they wanted me to relocate with them. I was given a promotion during that process of that job, and I was also told I was going to have another promotion.
I got pregnant at 17. I started working in strip clubs to make the money, and then I got back on the cocaine. I lived a very hard life raising my kids, but also trying to work in the clubs and use the drugs to make me work in the clubs. But I started bringing it home and bringing the people home. And my oldest son pretty much raised his siblings and made sure they got off to the bus stop because I was too hungover and throwing up. And sometimes I didn't even come home. I was out, you know, on the streets with people, and they would have to get up. They would have to get up and do for themselves. My dad one year, New Year's, it was probably about 2005, asked me, you know, what is it gonna take? You know, when are you gonna grow up and be a mother? And I said, you know what, I'm gonna move. And a couple months later, I moved to Georgia. I got right back into the drugs again and worked in the strip clubs here in Georgia. So I just knew, that's all I knew was drugs, men, that's how I associated life. I had to do drugs and I had to sleep with men to make money.
I've been a contractor for over 20 years, and it's crazy. If you're self-employed, if you work for yourself, it's feast or famine. It's scary sometimes. You have a week when you don't have work, and then you have a week where you have so much work you don't know when you're going to sleep. You have to know that God is before you and beside you, and things will fall into place. Work has been had been a bit slow, and actually had been approached recently to take a job working 9 to 5. And one of the guys that I do a lot of work for had actually called him up on a Wednesday and told him, "Hey, listen, I want you to know I'm thinking about doing this because it would impact our work." The next day, he called me and he said, "I've got something to tell you."
During that time that we really encourage one another, when I was feeling discouraged about things, he would always come in and speak the word over our situation, and it would encourage me, and then it would be vice versa. When he would get down, the enemy would always try to come in and seem like he would shine a light on everybody else that doesn't pay their tithes and has got everything.
They just got a new car.
I literally would just have to speak the word, because I would lay awake in bed at night and just sit there and try to do numbers in my head. And financial trouble is the #1 cause of divorce. Yeah. And we really had to stand strong during this time.
It wasn't a very easy decision. My wife, we talked about 2 weeks before I got the phone call. She said, if something doesn't happen soon, we're gonna have to rethink our giving. We're gonna have to rethink about our tithes and offering. And I was very strong there when she said that, and I said what, I guess the man of the house wanted to say, and I said, "No, baby, God's never let us down, He never will." But when I said that, I had to go and turn and walk away, and I had to go into my closet and I had to pray to God, and I was like, "Lord, I know what your word says, and I'm gonna have to stand on it. Malachi 3:10, it's the only time I can test you." And I said, "Right now, I'm testing you. You told me that if I give in my tithes and my offering, that you'll open up the floodgates of heaven, and you'll pour out a blessing so much I cannot contain." And I said, "I'm not feeling that right now, and I need you. I need you." It was the most real conversation I've ever had with him in my life. During this transition, one of the things I kept struggling with was, I've been doing everything that's right. I've been paying my tithes. I've been giving my offerings, and I started thinking, and I started really getting into my own heart. Why is that? Have I been doing this? And part of it, really most of it, was because it's what I was taught to do, and it was me having religious habit, and then the deeper I got in my relationship with the Lord and standing on His words, it went from religious habit to that relationship. And in that relationship, that's when He wraps His arms around me, and He said, it's like He's telling me, "Look, this world and everything that's in it, it doesn't matter, but when I wrap my arms around you, that's all that matters." And so that was the most real thing for me, was to understand that I was doing all the right things, but I was doing them out of a habit instead of that relationship. When we did that, that's when everything happened. Everything just totally changed.
About 3 years ago, a friend of mine from Miami, her mom and her live here, and Sue asked me to come to church. I was like, "No, it's not for me." And And I don't know, one day I was just like, all right, I'll go try it. And I walked in by myself, didn't know anyone, and I was just, it was the scariest feeling, but walking in and being greeted by, Kathy, I remember her, and her hug just felt so welcoming, and so, I felt wanted. I didn't feel judged. And it was just, the worship just changed my whole life. And I walked in there with no kids, just me, and they just opened arms to me and invited me to coffee and was inviting me to connect groups, and we did the tree lighting, and it was just like, wow, like this is nice, and nobody judged me. It's like everybody wanted to be with me, and it wasn't just because that we were gonna go hang out and drink, and it was like normal things like coffee dates. I didn't know that existed. So it was nice. And I think my salvation day was the day that we had communion, and Pastor Jeff was preaching. I don't even remember the exact words. I just remember crying so hard, and for the first time I felt forgiven. I felt like I ate that bread and I choked so hard because I was crying so hard, and it was just the most embarrassing thing, but I cried so hard, like I've never cried that way before. And I felt like that day I was being forgiven, like everything was pouring out of me that I've been holding in for years. And I just felt like God's on my side, like I'm forgiven. I do belong in this church. I am somebody. I belong there.
The next day, he called me and he said, I've got something to tell you. And I said, okay. He said, I'm thinking about my business and what I want to do, and I'm going to talk to my wife and I'll, get back with you. And so he called me a couple days later and asked me if I would be interested in buying his business out. And so he said, I want you, you're my number one, I want you to do it. I mean, I've been working for him for 20 years, and we had a really good relationship, and I always try to do my best, do a good job, thorough, on time. And so, and his brother's in the same field that I am, but he offered the business to me, which was, kind of a miracle. And I've been working with this guy for 20 years, and I never would have imagined that something like this would have happened. But I think God is really into people committing, being faithful, and being generous, and it doesn't have to be huge. It's usually the being faithful, the being committed, the being consistent, the being generous as a lifestyle, and then God behind the scenes is blessing you, and unexpected things happen.
During all this, I had started putting out applications and started, just putting little feelers out. And so when I got back from that meeting with my employer and meeting with the general contractor, and all that fell through, it was that evening I got a call. And I got a call from the company that I'm with now. The interview was for a foreman position. The next day I received a phone call from the senior project manager, and he said, but what I want to do is I want to throw you a curveball. He said, well, I want to make you a new offer. I wanted you for actually a superintendent role. I can't express how much difference there is right now with our life. I totally felt his arms wrap around us. All the burdens that we had, the thought of losing everything, it seemed like just a brief moment. He wipes all that away, and he says, I have so much more for you right here. You were looking at all this and what you thought you needed, but I have this. There was no one more second. It was God's time, because he had to prove to me that there was nothing I could do, that I had to rely on him 100%. As he did that, and it's right before my eyes, so vivid and so real, so tangible, and we were in such desperation. It was the most remarkable, profound way that he could have wrapped his arms around me and said, I have you. It's still a daily progress. We didn't win the lottery, but but then again, we did. You know, we have a new perspective on life.
It was just, everything started changing. I started getting phone calls, like I got a really good job, and I started getting more hours. It's just like prayers were showing up. Like, it's like, wow, you know, we've been praying over this, and now my husband's going to church, and he had back problems before he started coming to church. And he ended up getting a really good job that had insurance, and he got his back, got surgery on his back. And he just, it had helped him. It helped him change his whole life. He started going to church every Sunday with me. My little man, he's 12, he just got baptized probably a year ago. Since I wasn't raised, you know, knowing who God was and to pray and to go into church and how to live a Christian life. And now I'm able to pass this down to my kids, and my kids will be able to show their kids and my grandkids, you know, so I changed it. I put God into this family. You know, I didn't think there was anything to live for. My life was based on drugs and men and hanging out on the streets. And I'm ready to be more confident with myself. I'm ready to stand in front of an audience and help youth and bring people out of the darkness and show them that there's more, and there's such a big God that loves us, and that we don't have to give up on ourselves, and we don't have to do the drugs, and even though you don't feel the love you come from your own family, but there is a God, and that we're not walking alone. So my future, I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
I know well the many lives that have been changed through the generosity of our members. Members just like you. As the senior pastor of the church, I know that we have many more people to reach. People are being touched and changed every week. You are making a difference. So let's not slow down. Let's not get weary of doing good for God. It's imperative that we move forward in faith, knowing that at just the right time, God will do exactly what He's promised. At just the right time, we will see an overwhelming number of lives changed through the ministry of this church.
We believe that. We believe the time is now, church. We are vision builders. Will you join us?
I'm built on faith.
We're built on faith.
I am built on faith.
We are vision builders. Awesome. Come on. Look, those aren't the only stories that we have. It's just 3 clips, one from each campus. And it's just a clip of their life. It's not the crescendo of all that they're going to do. SHEILA, I've known SHEILA for 15 years, and she's just a constant through the life of this church. And I've known Jeffrey and April now for a little while, and just hearing his testimony, and he said, you know, it wasn't about what we were doing. I had to shift my heart towards the things of God. And then CANDICE, her overwhelming testimony. I remember when she had that moment and she walked into our church and she was crying during communion. I remember standing up in the Milton church, and the Milton church was only about as big as this center section right here, and going, this girl is just losing her mind. She's crying so hard. But I've seen from that point forward what's happened in her. And I know that she's only the beginning of the story. You know, CANDICE got saved in our church, and she's got a great testimony up there. She's been through things that most of us just read about. We really can't relate. We really can't understand the gravity of her situation. But I've seen her go from that place, from just coming to church, go from that place, coming to church, to go to where she is now, being the church in so many lives. I shared this story last service that last year my grandmother got very sick, and she was on hospice for about a year, and it stretched my family about to our limit. Caring for an elderly parent at home is very, very difficult to do, especially when that parent can't do anything for themselves. And CANDICE saw what was going on in my family, and CANDICE stepped forward, and she said, hey, listen, this is what I do, hospice care. How can I help? And she started coming over to my grandmother's house and caring for her in the last days of her life. A girl who I never would have thought came into our church, came into our life, receives Jesus in our church, and then becomes the church back to my family. It's unbelievable what God will do when we surrender our lives to Him. And then in our staff meeting last week, Pastor Katie from the Milton campus was crying in our staff meeting, and she said, "You're not gonna believe what happened." She had one of the girls from our campus. We didn't even know, but last Christmas she wrote on her dream card that we hang on the tree, she wrote down, "I want to get custody of my son back." We didn't even know she had a son. And she didn't tell anybody, but she prayed and she prayed and she prayed. And last week, she was able to go across the country with a court order and a police escort to take her son out of terrible circumstances and bring him back to Georgia. And if that wasn't enough, Candice heard about what was going on, and Candice rallied the girls of the church together. When that little boy came back to a home in a state he had never been to, in a city he didn't know, in a house he'd never walked in before, with a mom he just met again, he walked into a room full of toys provided by the Milton Church, because one lady who received so much love and so much grace because of what you have done, church, that she was overwhelmed to respond in kind in someone else's life. You see, it starts with us, but it never ends with us. We've got to understand that every individual, I believe this, every individual that God creates, he creates with a purpose. And he created every individual. So you sitting where you're sitting, I don't know how you feel, I don't know what you think, but God created you for a purpose. And the tragedy of tragedies is that so many people are going to go through this life not knowing what their purpose is. But you have a purpose in God. And it isn't the same as mine. I can't contribute what God has given you. God has given you gifts to give on. The Bible says we're given gifts that overflow out of our lives. They don't overflow because God wants to be wasteful. They overflow so that God can touch someone else. And the gifts that he's given you, I can't give to someone else. But he's given you those gifts. And he's brought you into this place. And he's set you at your job. And he's put you in your family. And he's got you in your neighborhood. And he's got friends and family around you. And he's not necessarily looking for you to go to Africa or Asia or South America. He's looking for you to stand on the soil that he's planted you on and give your gifts. And when we do, you'll have no idea. When Candice walked into our church and she got that hug from Kathy, we had no idea that a boy all the way across the country was going to get affected by that one act of love. Not out of what we can do, but out of response to what he's already done for us. We step forward with open arms, receiving people that we don't even know. And then we stand after 100 hours of testimony and video production and editing and sound changes, and we put it all together and we go, somebody's got to hear this story, and we finally get it on the screen and we go, wow! But it's only a bite. That's right. It's only a sliver. It's only a sample. It's only a taste of what God's doing. Because I'm telling you, we do this every year. And in every section, in every row of this church, I could give you a story. A story of God's amazing faithfulness. Not of how good our church is. I mean, I love our church. But God is the one ultimately that we call good. So look, God's given you that special ordained gift. God's given you resources in your life. And the beginning of our testimony is we realize, like Jeffrey said, we recognize where our provision comes from. We recognize the one who's given, and we get ready to give back to him. If we can do that, if we can recognize what those gifts are, and we can begin to recognize the purpose he's given them to us for, and plant them in the soil of our life, don't consume your contribution. What God has given you, he's given to you to give through you so that someone else might be blessed. And I know you're thinking, I already tithe, and that's our first step. And it's a big step if you haven't taken it yet. 10% of your income, that's a big step. And you're thinking, I already tithe and I already serve. I'm serving back in kids. And then I also serve on the door, and then I play the drums, and then I serve back in the video team, and then I serve, and then I serve, and then I serve. What more do you want from me? It's not me. What has God given you? And what's your response going to be? Because I want to tell you, when God moved Sonny and I over across town to Alpharetta to manage a campus there, and then 5 years later he called us back here again, I thought, God, literally, are you kidding me? I had to shift my heart, and now I love this city, and now you want me to shift my heart back to where I already shifted it from? What are you doing? He said, laughing. I said, God, you're taking this just a little too far. God, isn't it just a little bit much? Like, you've got my faith. Come on, aren't you taking it a little bit too far? But when we take our eyes off our circumstances and our situation, we lift our eyes up to heaven and we see what God has done for us. Oh my gosh, tears should come to our eyes to realize that he gave his only son because he loved us so much. And we see baseball games and basketball games and we hear preachers and we watch TV and we hear God gave his only son. We're like, yeah, it's not Christmas yet. No, it's not a Christmas message. It's a right now, in-your-face living message. There's people in the world preaching against Christianity because they say, we don't want to serve a God that would go that far. What kind of God is it that would give his only son in sacrifice for our people? And I understand the argument, but my response is, a God that loves you that much. That's the kind of God. But you want 10% from me, and you want me to serve, and you want me to love my neighbors. I love myself. I don't even like my neighbor. How am I going to love them? You can't do it without God. You can't do it without spending time in prayer. You can't do it without reading the word. You can't do it without discipleship and fellowship. You can't do it without making a decision every day. God, I'm going to love my neighbor. And right now, I don't. But God, as I step forward, God, turn that water into wine. God, as I step forward, God, heal my heart. And let me show it to the priests. God, as I step forward into this water, God, part this Red Sea of hatred. Right. That I might love my neighbor. That the testimony of my life won't be, I was so good that I loved every neighbor. But the testimony of my life would be, I never loved that guy until God changed my heart, changed my spirit. Change my idea of what good was. Because if we'll do that, if we'll do what God's calling us to do, the impact, the influence of our lives will be enormous. Everywhere we set our foot. And it won't be because we've set our foot. It's because when we set our foot, God walked with us. When you walk into work tomorrow, God walked with you. When you loved your neighbor, God entered that home. When you moved, God moved with you. And that's the testimony. That's the story every time. It's not that I stepped into, I was doing drugs, I was doing the wrong thing, I was working these, and I stepped into the church and I just decided to change. No. I stepped into the presence of God and the people of God, and they reached out to me in ways I never knew even existed. And he changed my life. God is so, she didn't say, I wouldn't have wanted her to. C3 Church changed my life. Heaven help us if we're the answer. He's the answer through us every single time. So listen, I understand. You know, we read about David a couple of months ago, and David's a guy that God says, not people say, not I think, God says is a man after his own heart. And at the end of his life, in 1 Chronicles 29, I want to read this to you out of the New Living Translation. In 1 Chronicles 29, we find David doing what God wants us to do. We find David moving out of a response at the end of his life, responding to what God's done in his heart, in his world. So read with me here as we put this on the screen. It says, and now, David says, because of my devotion to the temple of my God, I am giving all of my own private treasures of gold and silver to help in the construction. This is in addition to the building materials I have already collected for his holy temple. God wants you to do what David did. And out of a response to all the goodness that he's given to you, turn around and hand back to heaven. Have a transaction with heaven today that says, God, I don't know how, but here is in heaven. God, I don't know what's going to happen. God, but here is in heaven. God, let it be done in my life, not just on the earth like it is in heaven, God, but let it be done on my piece of earth, just like it is in heaven. Because I want to tell you, the testimony of my life, and so many lives here today, is that if God hadn't moved, we wouldn't be. When I stepped into this church, I've said this 100 times, Kathy Kramer said hello to us. She took a gift that she didn't even consider probably worthwhile, the gift of hospitality, the gift of kindness. And when we stepped in, we had been to North Point Community Church, fantastic church. We'd been to Perimeter Church, fantastic church, 12, 15, 30,000 members. We'd been to all these other churches. We'd been to Calvary Chapel Community Church with 200 members. We'd been all over the place, and we ended up in this ugly Ingalls shopping center. And I said to Sonny, I said, there's no way I'm walking into this place. And she said, come on. I said, we've been to North Point. That's amazing. We've been to Perimeter. That's unbelievable. We've been to this Calvary Chapel. They had great hearts. Why are we walking into this shopping center? And Kathy Kramer did something that no one else did. She said hello. And it changed our lives forever.